Sophie Nguyen, a 32-year-old British investment strategist of Vietnamese descent, who dresses modestly and avoids flaunting her wealth. Her status-obsessed family underestimates her. Uncle Richard, the wealthy patriarch who flaunts his Mayfair penthouse. Cousin Oliver, a socialite who brags about his designer wardrobe. Aunt Margaret constantly compares Sophie to her more successful children. A lavish dinner at Uncle Richard's £10 million Kensington townhouse. Crystal glasses clink as the relatives discuss stock portfolios, luxury cars, and ski trips to Switzerland. Sophie sits quietly, sipping Earl Grey tea, her expression unreadable. Oliver, smirking, eyeing Sophie's outfit, still shopping at Tesco. Soph? When are you going to treat yourself to Savile Row? Aunt Margaret, sighing dramatically, your cousin just bought a flat in Chelsea. When will you make us proud? Sophie smiles politely, her fingers resting lightly on the sleek briefcase beside her. Inside lies a game-changing surprise. The table hums with self-satisfied chatter, Richard boasting about his latest yacht, Oliver flashing his platinum Rolex, Margaret listing her daughter's hedge fund victories. Then Sophie sets down her teacup with a soft click. Sophie, calmly, actually, I've been working on something. A pause. Oliver scoffs. Richard barely glances up. Oliver, grinning, let me guess, a very humble mutual fund? Sophie unclasps her briefcase and slides a single document across the table. Richard picks it up, then pales. Richard, voice tight, this can't be right. Aunt Margaret, snatching it, what is it? The paper shows a £1.2 billion private equity deal, the largest in Europe this year. And at the bottom, the lead architect's name, Sophie Nguyen. Sophie, leaning back, smiling, I structured the deal quietly. The returns? Let's just say Chelsea flats are quaint. Oliver's Rolex suddenly feels cheap. Margaret's lips press into a thin line. Richard stares, slack-jawed. Sophie, sipping her tea, I don't like to brag. Silence. And somewhere, a platinum watch loses its shine. Sophie Nguyen set down her fork with deliberate calm, the silverware barely making a sound against the fine china. The table had fallen into that familiar, anticipatory silence, the kind that always preceded another round of veiled jabs at her modest career. Uncle Richard's booming voice cut through the murmurs. James, why don't you start us off? Another property flip, I assume? James smirked, adjusting his Tom Ford cufflinks. Belgravia townhouse. 2.1 million profit in 6 months. Olivia twirled a lock of her blown-out hair, her diamond tennis bracelet glinting. Signed an exclusivity deal with Harrods. Oh, she flashed her Patek Philippe with a theatrical flourish. Just a little reward for myself. Laughter rippled around the table. Then, like clockwork, all eyes slid to Sophie. Come on, Soph, Olivia cooed, lips glossy with champagne. Surely you've done something noteworthy? Aunt Margaret patted her hand, voice dripping with faux sympathy. She volunteers at the food bank, don't you, dear? Sophie took a slow sip of her Earl Grey, the steam curling like the tension in the room. The scent of truffle risotto and roasted grouse mingled with something sharper, the metallic tang of impending reckoning. Actually. Wait. James interrupted, grinning. Don't tell me you finally got promoted from, what was it? Data entry? Richard's thunderous laugh shook the crystal glasses. Sophie's fingers tightened around her water glass, knuckles whitening, the only outward sign of the storm brewing beneath her calm. Then, with a small, deliberate smile, she reached for her briefcase. The table wouldn't be laughing much longer. The table erupted in sympathetic murmurs as Sophie stayed quiet. Oh, darling, Aunt Margaret sighed, producing a handkerchief like a magician pulling a rabbit. We know London property is impossible these days. Why, just yesterday I saw the sweetest studio in Zone 6, Oliver whispered gravely, as if disclosing a terminal illness. Perfect starter home. Margaret trilled, digging through her Birkin. I've got my agent's card here somewhere. Sophie watched, amused, as she fished out a crumpled 2017 tube map. 3 one-pound coins fused together by ancient gum. What appeared to be a fossilized mint. Ah. Margaret brandished a bent business card. Nigel specializes in repossessions. Across the table, James pantomimed playing a tiny violin until his wife elbowed him. Oliver sighed dramatically. Really, Soph, if you ever need to borrow money. He paused for effect. I know an excellent public library. Chuckles rippled until Sophie's phone buzzed. A notification lit up the screen. Received £4,287,900 settlement completed for Penthouse 42, 1 Hyde Park. Wrong number? James snatched the device. His smirk died mid-sentence. This says. Must be spam, Sophie said mildly, plucking her phone back as Margaret's starter home card fluttered into the truffle risotto. Silence. Oliver's Patek Philippe suddenly needed adjusting. The silence stretched like the Thames at low tide. Olivia's laughter cut through the air, sharp as shattered crystal. Oh, come on, what's the joke? Did you Photoshop your banking app? Sophie dabbed her lips with a napkin, unfazed. No need. She nudged her scuffed briefcase forward with one foot. The papers are right here. Richard's steak knife screeched against his plate. Enough. We humor your little fantasies, but this. Fantasies? Sophie flipped open the briefcase. Like when you tell people you went to Eton? She slid a document across the table. Because this application says. Hull Community College? The temperature in the room plummeted. Richard's face purpled. Now see here. Or Oliver's art gallery internship. Sophie continued, pulling up an Instagram screenshot. Funny how all your posts are outside the gift shop. Oliver's champagne flute hit the floor with a crash. Aunt Margaret clutched her pearls. Who are you? Sophie smiled, slow, deliberate. The one who's catalogued every lie told at this table for 10 years. She tapped the briefcase. Now. Shall we discuss the facts? The room held its breath. The briefcase opened with a click that echoed like a gunshot. Inside, employment contracts, forensic audit reports, deeds. Let's see, Sophie mused, sliding documents across the linen like a dealer dealing fatal cards. James Belgravia flip? Actually, my silent investment. Oliver's hands shook as he picked up the Harrods contract, Sophie's LLC stamped across the signature line. Richard's cigar tumbled into the creme brulee as he stared at the mortgage papers for his own townhouse, with Sophie's parent company listed as the lender. You were, James' voice cracked, bankrolling us? Observing, Sophie corrected, sipping her tea. At 19% interest. The grandfather clock's ticking swelled to a deafening roar as the family's reality collapsed in real time. Oliver's scream shattered the silence first. This is illegal. I'll call the Times? Sophie held up a USB drive. I've got your influencer tax returns. Those Cartier watches look awfully taxable. Aunt Margaret made a sound like a punctured inflatable. But, your Uniqlo sweaters. Breathable, Sophie shrugged. Unlike your corset, Margaret. Richard finally found his voice. What do you want? 3 things. Sophie counted on her fingers. 1. My birthday gift is no longer a thoughtful discount coupon. 2. Stop interrogating my mother about her disappointing daughter. 3. A synchronized chorus of phone rings cut her off. For banking alerts. For choked gasps. James was the first to connect the dots. You called in the loans? Technically, Sophie checked her watch, the bank did. About 40 seconds ago. Chaos erupted. Richard clutched his chest like a Victorian widow. Oliver hyperventilated into his monogrammed napkin. James actually sprinted toward the bay window, triple-glazed. Margaret began negotiating with deities she'd ignored since Thatcher was PM. Sophie sipped her now-cold Earl Grey. Relax. I've restructured your debt. She slid new contracts across the ruined dessert. Sign these, and you keep your toys. Terms. Full apology to Sophie's mother, in writing. Sophie added to the family trust's voting board. Mandatory Christmas volunteering, at that food bank. You viper, Richard hissed. Sophie stood, smoothing her modest blazer. No. A viper would have let you crash. I'm just the accountant who noticed. As she left, the sound of 12 pens signing away their pride was sweeter than any revenge. The echoes of signed contracts and shattered pride still hummed in the air as Sophie Gwynne stepped into the crisp London night. The city lights glittered like scattered diamonds, indifferent to the quiet revolution that had just unfolded in that gilded townhouse. For years, she had been the silent observer, the disappointing daughter, the modest one, the woman they assumed had nothing to show for her quiet ambition. In one evening, she had dismantled their illusions, not with theatrics, but with the unassailable logic of spreadsheets and signatures. Yet as she walked through the hushed streets of Kensington, the adrenaline of the moment faded, leaving something heavier in its wake. The hollow taste of victory. Yes, she had humbled them. Yes, they would finally see her. But respect extorted through fear was not the respect she'd craved. Her family had been insufferable, yes, but they were still her blood. And now, the fractures between them might never heal. Revenge, she realized, was a dish best served cold and utterly flavorless. Their stunned faces, their trembling hands signing her terms, it had given her a fleeting thrill, but not the deep fulfillment she'd imagined. Because true worth isn't measured by forced acknowledgments. It's measured by the quiet certainty of knowing it, even when others refuse to. The ledger's hidden lesson. Sophie had built her empire in silence, not for accolades, but for the love of the game, the strategy, the patience, the art of calculated moves. But tonight, she'd broken her own rules. She'd played not for the sake of business, but for pride. And in doing so, she'd become what she despised in them. She paused under a street lamp, the weight of the irony settling on her shoulders. The cold air filled her lungs as she exhaled, watching her breath vanish into the dark. A richer currency. Money was a tool. Power was leverage. But the rarest wealth of all was peace, the ability to walk away from the battlefield without needing to fire a single shot. Perhaps the ultimate power move wouldn't be flaunting her empire. Perhaps it would be letting them believe whatever they wished, because her joy was never mortgaged to their opinions. The final balance. As she hailed a cab, she made a decision. The contracts would stand, they were legally binding, after all. But she would add an unexpected clause. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to her mother. Let's have dim sum tomorrow. Just us. No gloating. No victory lap. Just the quiet understanding that some bonds mattered more than being right. Because the richest person isn't the one with the most assets, but the one who needs the least validation. And with that, Sophie Gwynne melted into the London night, no longer the family's invisible woman, but finally free from the need to prove it.